President Obama has appointed George Mitchell as U.S. envoy to the region. Do you think he's in a position to succeed where others before him have failed?
No, I don't. I think he's got a tremendous track record as a mediator. I thought his appointment was a very hopeful sign. You've got a politician of significant stature who's regarded that way in the region, who can go to the president and say, I need you here, I need you there, and that sort of thing. And you've got some very able people going into the administration who are experienced in Middle East issues. The problem isn't Mitchell. The problem is a series of difficult diplomatic conundrums. Like I said, if you move towards reconciliation among Palestinians, you disrupt reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis. There are a whole series of problems like this. So I think Mitchell is the right man for the job if the job were today as it may have been defined, say, in 1997 or 2000. It's simply too big for him now.
Do you think the Palestinian people trust the U.S. to be a fair mediator in this conflict?
No, not at all. I mean, the Palestinians will tell you right off the bat, the United States is completely biased towards Israel. There was some blip of hope about Obama as somebody who would be different. I think those hopes were dashed even before he was inaugurated as president, especially because Obama said nothing during the war in Gaza. So, no, Palestinians don't hope for the United States to be a neutral actor. Some leaders say, well, look, we're not going to be able to make the United States come over to our side, but maybe we can use the United States to our advantage. If we can convince the United States, then we can bring the Israelis along. So we go to the United States not because they're a neutral actor, but because it's sometimes easier negotiating with them than directly with the Israelis. But on a popular level, no, the United States is regarded as deeply partial by most Palestinians.
Are you in favor of the U.S. talking directly to Hamas?
Yes, but I don't think it's a big issue. And I'll tell you why I think it would be unbalanced a good idea. We simply don't know a lot about Hamas. Hamas doesn't know an awful lot about us. Simply on a level of intelligence gathering, it seems to me to make an awful lot of sense to talk. And I think we get ourselves into this very strange trap where we think by talking to somebody, we are legitimating them. I don't think that's true. I think somebody who goes into rob 7-Eleven can still speak to the owner, and you, even if you want to communicate threats, you do so through talking.
But doesn't that give them some international stature?
It gives them some. That's the downside, but I think that's greatly exaggerated. Hamas as a movement says, we are who we are because we represent the Palestinians. They're really grounded in Palestinian society. If they turn up in negotiations with the United States, it lets them swagger a little bit more, but I don't think it fundamentally affects them as a movement.
What do you think the other Arab states should play a role in this, in particular Egypt?
Egypt is in a very tough position right now because on a popular level, there's a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians and a lot of sympathy for Hamas. At the same time, Egypt is watching a radical movement on its border that sometimes does things the Egyptians don't like. At one point, Hamas tore down the fence between Gaza and Egypt, and people poured over the border. Egypt has its own Islamic movement domestically, the Muslim Brotherhood, which it's trying to clamp down on. Hamas is related to the Muslim Brotherhood, so they don't really like the idea of Hamas on their borders. On the other hand, they've got some real strong cards to play with Hamas. They control the Egyptian-Gaza border. They could actually open up supplies in and out of Gaza. If anybody from Gaza wants to travel elsewhere in the world, they have to go through Egypt. So the Egyptians can play a mediating role. In a sense, the Egyptians have been doing what I've been saying the Americans should do, sitting down and talking with Hamas, but doing so extremely toughly. They have essentially told Hamas, we're not letting supplies through, we're not letting you travel, we're not letting your people in or out unless you are a little bit more forthcoming in diplomatic terms. So Egypt is a very tough bargainer with Hamas. That's kind of the role that they've been playing.
I wonder what the chances are of a figure like Gandhi or Martin Luther King arising from the Palestinians? Somebody to say, we are going to resist, but we're going to completely do it nonviolently. What are the chances of that?
I think very slim. I think that's too bad because I think it would actually succeed. But to have a serious nonviolent campaign, you need all kinds of, you don't just need a leader. I mean, yes, an inspirational leader like a Gandhi and a Martin Luther King helps, but these people were backed by very, very strong organizations and incredibly disciplined organizations that could say, it doesn't matter how hard you hit us, what tools you use against us, ultimately we are appealing to your humanity and you won't be able to, we think you won't be able to do this forever.
But doesn't the ideology play a role into this?
Absolutely. The Palestinians are not convinced. I mean, their ideology is, I think, well, I should say, let me put it this way. It's not necessarily strictly ideology. It's their understanding of the Israelis. I think they've got the Israelis wrong. I think a nonviolent strategy, if it were sustained, would actually work with the Israelis. I think it would get a very tough response initially, but over time, the Israeli will would begin to buckle.
But would it work given the Islamic jihadist ideology that Hamas has been using so well?
I think so. I mean, the odd thing about Hamas is that it's a movement that will never renounce the right to use violence. But most movements in most states don't renounce the right to use violence. They will sometimes hold their fire, and they've held their fire in Gaza. Hamas is the only movement that is disciplined enough not only to enforce a ceasefire on its followers, but to enforce it on other movements. When they say no rockets from Gaza, their people don't fire rockets and other people don't fire rockets from Gaza. So they wouldn't subscribe to a pacifist ideology. You would never mistake any Hamas leader for Gandhi or Martin Luther King. They might be capable of restraining violence for a prolonged period, however.
So is anything really going to change here? Or are we just going to get used to this as a permanent situation where sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it erupts in violence?
I hate to tell you this, but I think that is what we're going to see. I don't see any viable path out right now. I mean, one thing I will say about Hamas, for all the problems that it causes, it is the one actor here which seems to have the ability to pull new tricks up its sleeve. When it tore down the fence between Egypt and Gaza, it startled everybody. Nobody saw this coming. And it made everybody reconfigure, recalculate, and so on. It's possible that Hamas has some trick up its sleeve. It probably won't be a good one for the other parties. But I don't see any other kind of possibility for short-term movement.
Professor Brown, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Mideast Journal. I'm Mimi Geerges. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay well.